Hello there. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Marche, the webinar director at Advice Chaser. Before we introduce our guests and get started, I do need to do a little bit of legal housekeeping. Advice Chaser, the host of this webinar, is not a registered investment advisor. We cannot and do not give financial advice. Today's presentation is for educational purposes only and cannot be considered advice for any person's individual situation. Advice Chaser regularly hosts informative webinars, such as this one, featuring a variety of knowledgeable professionals, many of whom are licensed advisors. Any opinions, ideas, jokes, or principles expressed by presenters are their own, and however true, funny, or interesting, are not endorsed by Advice Chaser. Please do not act on the information you hear today without consulting a qualified financial professional. Well, we're thrilled to have you here at this educational presentation. Attendees are muted. We do encourage you to interact with us through the chat box. And if you ask a question in the chat box, go ahead and leave your phone number as well. If we can't get to your question, we'll go ahead and make sure someone reaches out to you after today's event. We want this experience to be as educational as possible, so please don't hesitate to ask for clarification or expansion of the material. I'd love to introduce you to today's moderator. When Tran came to the US as a 2-year-old immigrant with his family, he attended Cal Poly of Sonoma, majoring in finance and marketing. Wen has worked in the financial services industry since 2004. To better service his clients, he started Wen Wealth Solutions in 2016 as an independent financial planning firm that partners with some of the best solutions providers across multiple industries. This team covers a broad range of financial planning and helps clients take care of what's important so they can spend more time doing the things they love. And those of you who have attended our webinars before know that we have Anna Lee as a frequent contributor, and we're so grateful to have her here. Anna Lee is the founder and president of CareRight Inc., the concierge of senior care planning. CareRight assists families in navigating the complexities associated with the aging process by managing crisis situations, developing a proactive aging plan, facilitating family meetings, and providing needed support to struggling caregivers. For Anna Lee, providing proactive senior care planning to families is more than just a career, it's her passion. Anna Lee has spent her entire 27-year career in the senior care industry and has become a nationally recognized expert in the field of senior care planning. She's the author of The Invisible Patient, which comes out later this year, and it outlines the emotional, physical, and financial toll experienced by caregivers. And Anna Lee, I'm so excited to have you present again, and I'm going to go ahead and stop my share, and you can go ahead and take over here. Oh, actually.
Right. You're ready?
Yep, I should be ready. Mm-hmm.
Okay. I always hold my breath just a little bit. And for good reason. I'm a social worker. I'm not an IT guy. So let me make sure that this advances. Yep. Okay. Well, hi, everybody. My name is Anna Lee Kruger with CareRight Incorporated, and I'm the co-founder of Plain Life Now. Just a little bit of background. I'm a social worker. I'm a geriatric social worker consultant. And I started my own company in 2011 called CareRight to help families across the country really sort out what their care options are and help them navigate the very complex and confusing healthcare system that we have. So I work with families virtually since 12. Families just don't live down the block from each other like they used to almost 30 years ago when I first started doing this as a social worker. You go to house and the kids could easily gather around the kitchen table, but now we leverage, back then in the day it was Skype, but now Zoom, to bring families together and have those family meetings and the conversations that most families don't want to have because they're uncomfortable about the what ifs of aging. Like, what if mom needs more care? And what are we going to do if dad has, dementia? And when his dementia progresses, what's our plan? Today's topic could not be more timely because we know that the majority of seniors want to age in place. So today we're going to talk about what that really means and what that looks like, and just the pros and the cons of that type of decision. I can tell you when I ask my clients, and my clients, the whole family. So it's not only the Ethel and the Marvin, but it's all the kids or the stepkids, or, with blended families these days, it can be pretty complex family meeting. So when I ask moms and dads, the Ethels and the Marvins, what are your goals as you age? They say usually the same two things. Number one is always, I want to stay at home. I want to age at, you can tell when they've been in workshops. I want to age in place at home. So I'm like, okay, they've had some training here. But they almost always want to say that they want to stay at home as long as they can. And then out of their next breath, they'll say, I don't want to be a burden on my kids. Well, unfortunately, who do you think it is that's calling me for their free consult to put an aging plan in place? It's the adult kids. Why? Because they're getting burned out. They're getting frustrated. They don't understand aging. They don't understand how one doctor's appointment could possibly take all day, but yet it does. Or they don't understand dementia and why mom is behaving the way she is. Or they were blindsided that dad just had a stroke and he's the full-time caregiver to mom with dementia. And so families could get continually kind of blindsided by these aging issues and medical crises and falls and urinary tract infections, all of those things that are pretty prevalent, making that aging process pretty bumpy, and families needing some help and support, and that neutral third party person to help facilitate their family meetings and give them some guidance on what their options really are based on what they can afford and their family dynamics. So let's talk about the aging in place, because this is an interesting concept. A lot of people just, without thinking about it, they're like, nope, whatever happens, I want to stay at home no matter what. But I can tell you there is so much misinformation or misunderstanding of fact out there, that a lot of people are making very poor decisions because they aren't making informed decisions. So from a statistics perspective, we know that 87% of adults age 65 and older want to stay in their current home. We know that 71% of people age 50 to 64 want to age in place as well. So all across the board, the majority of seniors, when they think about their aging years, they think about spending those aging years in their own home.
Annalie, we're getting a little delay on the audio a couple times. Why don't you just go ahead and turn off your camera? Just hit the stop video button. That should fix it.
Okay. All right. So the population is rising. Is that better as far as the delay? Okay, good.
Yeah.
It's probably because I live in Florida. We are having a major tropical storm right now. So the population is rising. We know that the baby boomers, in May of 2011, the first wave, those born in 1946 of the baby boomers, are starting to turn 65, and the last wave is in 2030. Today's life expectancy is 81 years old. Back in the day when I first started, it was like 65 years old, and now it's 81, and it's going to continue to get, they're going to continue to age and live longer. So that's why it's important, as especially as financial planners as well, to really understand these aging issues, because you'll very well likely have your clients for a very long time. And it's very important as a consumer that you understand aging, because we're all getting kind of in that category. We're all getting older. So women's life expectancy is 81 years right now. Men's life expectancy as of current research is 76 years old. Overcrowding of nursing homes and assisted living will create a problem in the future. So we have, I wrote my thesis on this actually in 2010. I wrote my thesis on the landscape of long-term care and healthcare in general, with the healthcare system that we have is being it's woefully ill prepared for the volume that's coming our way. So we've got, if you've been in the healthcare system at all, whether most likely as a patient, you'll know that your doctor might be booked out by 2 or 3 months and you can't just get in right away. So you can't miss those specialty doctor's appointments like urologists or cardiologists or any kind of specialty doctor, because they could be really booked out for months on end. We know that even with home care right now, with the pandemic and the shortage of workers and the shortage of quality workers, home care is really struggling. And we also know that healthcare in general is struggling. We've got we've got seniors retiring earlier than what they expected to. We've got executive directors and nurse managers who weren't really planning on retiring, but because of the pandemic and just the terrible challenge that we have right now with staffing these facilities and taking care of our elderly people, a lot of people want to leave their career on a high note, so they're retiring. So we have a problem out here with healthcare, and so it's really important, and that's why I like to do these webinars, so that you can really understand what might some of your options be based on the staffing climate that we have right now in healthcare. And unfortunately, that's not going to change. We're going to be struggling with healthcare workers for a very long time. So when you think about, the pros of aging in place, what people like about the notion or the idea of aging in place is because they're in their own home, they're in their own surroundings, they feel like they have a sense of independence. It's important to their physical and emotional well-being to be able to stay at home. They like having the flexibility in their own schedule, and they like having privacy. Because when you think about if you ever have to move into a skilled rehab center, for therapy because you broke your hip, or moving into a nursing home, you may very well likely have a roommate, and those rooms are very small. So a lot of people complain about not having a lot of privacy when they move into a care community of some sort. So they really enjoy having their privacy and a sense of independence at home. The mental well-being, those who age in place retain their mental well-being than those moving into a facility. So there's some studies that say that they do better when they're at home because they're in their own environment, and that would be true in the very beginning stages of aging, but it's certainly not true as they start to deteriorate and lose their mobility and they start to be more isolated in their house. People need to be around other people. Elderly people do better, they eat better when they're around other people, and they certainly need to have structure and routine to their day. So it can be helpful for them to be able to stay at home in the beginning stages of, aging and in the early stages of dementia, but as they progress, it's really not as ideal as what you might think. They're also surrounded by a lifetime of memories because they have their pictures up on the wall, they have their trinkets, they have their, teacups and saucers and spoons that a lot of our elderly people collect. So they have their own memories around their house that they can help with just, reminiscing and looking at their memory retention. The other pros is they might have more access to the family, for sure. That's the case right now with COVID. In 2015, the survey by the National Council on Aging, 57% of seniors attributed having a loving family to helping them remain positive as they age. So having access to your family is critical. And during COVID right now, we've seen nothing but declines in their emotional well-being, in their appetites, in their sleep. We've seen increased in depression, anxiety, and increased in confusion because they don't have access to their families right now in some of these care facilities across the country because of COVID. So that's one perk, especially right now, of being able to stay at home, is at least your family can see you. You can bring care into the home, and we're going to talk about what that looks like and the cost of what that looks like too. So aging in place at home can be successful if there is an aging plan. The cons of aging in place at home is the socialization and loneliness. You have to think about, as people age and they don't get around as well, or they have pain, or they have shortness of breath, or they become incontinent, where they have accidents in their pants. All of those things deter and prevent people from wanting to get out and about. Or maybe they lose their license, and so they're not going to be able to get out and about. And then you start to see more increased confusion, anxiety, and depression, and definitely more cognitive impairment because of social isolation. More than 1/3 of adults aged 45 and older feel lonely, and nearly 1/4 of adults aged 65 and older are considered to be socially isolated. Social isolation was associated with about a 50% increase in risk of dementia, because again, we are social beings. We tend to thrive when we're around other people, especially persons with dementia. They need to be around other people so that they don't feel so alone and so isolated. 29% increased risk of heart disease and a 32% increased risk of stroke because of socialization and loneliness at home. Loneliness among heart failure patients was associated with a nearly 4 times increased risk of death, 68% increased risk of hospitalization, and 57% increased risk of emergency department visits, simply because they don't have enough people around them. They're isolated. The cons, the negatives of aging in place at home: they have increased anxiety, depression, and memory issues. The house can get overwhelming. Just the thought of having to keep up the house and the housework, and making sure the roof is maintained and that the driveway is maintained, and just the regular upkeep of a house can get really overwhelming. I want to just chime in here with this point that it's hard for adult kids to see their parents who used to be thriving, and maybe they were successful business owners, or sergeants in the military, and now that they're older, they have a hard time with critical thinking skills, with problem solving skills, and they tend to get more anxious and more overwhelmed with things that 10, 15 years ago they could have handled in stride. But as we get older, and we'll all be like this, so as we get older, we just have to modify our homes so that they can be safe and they don't feel so overwhelming. But that size and the upkeep of the house can be very overwhelming. And you'll know when your parents need more help, because when you go to visit them, you'll notice weight loss, and you'll notice that they can't keep the house up, or it's dirty, or it smells like urine, or they have flies all over because they don't have fresh food in the house. So there's going to be some definite signs that should tell you that, oh, this isn't working out very well. Safety and oversight. So who's going to actually maintain them at home safely? Who's going to oversee that they're taking their medications, that they're getting to their doctor's appointments, that they're not falling for scams, whether it's, over the internet, if they're still using the internet, or over the phone for telemarketers. So who's actually going to be there to make sure that they're safe, and overseeing that they're getting to their appointments and not having falls, or not having accidents, and not changing their clothes on a regular basis. Self-neglect is not enough care oversight in the house. So again, the self-neglect, those triggers, those red flags that you should be aware of are the weight loss, poor hygiene, their equipment, like their dishwasher isn't working, or their garbage disposal. When I go into people's houses, I look at those types of things, and those are things that families need to look at. Pop open the refrigerator door. What are they actually eating? Is the food, is it even still fresh? You'd be surprised what people will be eating because of either dementia, or their vision is so bad that they don't know that the food is already spoiled. Self-neglect is also when they're not taking their medications properly. So if you go and you check on your mom on Saturdays, and you're like, oh, she missed 4 days of her pills, then that should be a warning sign to you that mom needs more support in the house. Again, the weight loss is huge with elderly people, especially frail elderly people. They can become what we call failure to thrive. And once they lose enough weight, it's really hard for them to get that weight back on. And then any little sickness can really cause their demise. Expensive to have to bring in home care, so that can be a con, because again, most consumers assume that Medicare or someone else is going to pay for home care, and that's just not the case. So with home care, depending on like if they just came out of the hospital, for example, if your loved one just came home from the hospital, then yes, Medicare will cover home health care with physical therapy, occupational therapy, or speech therapy, and maybe cover some home care for a temporary period of time, maybe 2 or 3 weeks. But if you're needing companion care for help with activities of daily living, like bathing, dressing, grooming, transportation to appointments, medication reminders, that's all out of pocket. And depending on where you live, an average budget should be for you to think about, like depending on where you live. But if you budgeted $25 to $28 an hour for companion care, that's where they typically fall, as far as that's how much they charge. And so most home care companies, because again, we're having staffing issues, for the last few years, most home care companies have shifted with their business model that they used to allow you to be like a 1-hour client or a 2-hour client. But the problem is that they found that no one wants to work a 1-hour shift, right? Because these companions need to be able to earn a living. And so nobody wants a 1 or a 2-hour shift. So what's happened with home care is most of them have a shift minimum of 4 or 5 hours per shift, or minimums of 21 or 28 hours per week that you have to commit to for them to pick you up on services. Okay, so you can't just call and say, well, I just want someone from time to time. They just don't do that anymore because they can't find staff that want to cover that shift. The other reason why you want to have more home care than less home care, though, is because they really can help your loved one stay at home. But you do have, you just have to know going into it that you'll have to pay out of pocket for this. So there's a lot of pros to having home care. You just need to know that it's going to be costly. Ways to pay for that could be long-term care insurance. If you've put a financial solution in place, it could be long-term care insurance. You just have to look at the policy or call the person who sold you the policy and make sure, just go over what it covers. Other ways to pay for that could be aid and attendance through the VA. So there's different ways to pay for home care depending on what you may already have in place or what you might qualify for. Some people use reverse mortgages. Those aren't the answer or the solution for everybody. That's a very that can be a very dicey solution. You just have to be very aware, and your financial planner can talk to you about the pros and cons of reverse mortgages. So reliance on home care can be a challenge. Again, right now we have we have more seniors and more people needing home care than in some ways than what we have for staffing to take care of those folks. So I was talking to a financial planner actually this morning, and he's up in the Midwest, and he was looking, that's why he called me, because he needs some help with his parents. And he said, well, where we live, there's a 3 to 4 month waiting list for home care because they just don't have enough staff. And so the pandemic has really caused people to think about how are they going to do care how are they going to stay at home if they actually don't have caregivers that can help them stay at home? And guess who ends up providing that care? It's the adult children. So we'll get to that next. So reliance on home care, the caregiver knowledge, how trained are they? Again, you or your loved one are going to be at the mercy of someone who may or may not be trained very well. They may or may not have much compassion, and they may not be reliable. So what's your plan if you say, well, I'm going to age in place at home? Well, what are you going to do if 30% of the time the the caregiver is a no-show or they call in sick? Who's going to take care of you and help you get to the toilet and help make sure that you eat for that whole day? So the challenge is that, you know, they may or may not have a replacement companion that they can send out, but if they do send someone else out, you might not know who they are. Or say you have a 12-hour shift and that 12-hour companion called in, the only way they may be able to staff it is to send out, you know, 3 different people that can cover a 4-hour shift at each time. So then you're going to have 3 separate people that you might not know coming into your house. So my clients that have chosen to stay at home, they really complain a lot about just the reliance of depending on someone to be able to actually come into the home and take care of them properly, that knows how to cook. You have to keep in mind, 70 and 80 and 90-year-old people still know how to cook, but these companions are much, much younger. They don't know how to clean. They don't know how to cook most of the time. So it's really something that you have to think about. Dementia progression and safety. I can't tell you how many clients I have or how many families have called me for their consult because dad wandered away from the house again. And what are we supposed to do? You know, how are we supposed to get care in here when he keeps firing them? You know, we've had 3 different home care companies that we hired, but he keeps turning them away. So dementia progression and just poor decision making on your elderly loved ones. When they make poor decisions, that's going to be a con to aging in place at home because they will fail. Parents not doing as well at home as the adult kids would like to think. So this is a good time for me to bring up Hurricane Irma. So like I said, I'm in Florida and I have families all across the country that I work with to develop their aging plan because we use technology to bring these families together and talk about the what ifs of aging. So during the time of Hurricane Irma, or like the year before Hurricane Irma, I had all of these adult kids who I did the 30-minute consult with them. And they're like, oh, mom's doing okay. We don't want to have to talk about this stuff until after Christmas, or let's let her have her last Christmas at home. And then in January, we'll start talking about bringing care into the home or moving to assisted living or relocating mom from Florida to, you know, Akron, Ohio, where we live, for example. Well, guess what? The hurricane hit in September. So all of those folks who are like, oh, well, we want mom to stay at home and we'll address all of this in January. When those kids flew their moms and their dads up north to get out of the hurricane's path, my phone literally rang off the hook because all those kids who were so sure that mom was doing okay at home, after about a week after Hurricane Irma, that my phone started ringing off the hook. Why? Because this is how the adult kids realized mom is not doing as well as they thought at home. She's falling or she's incontinent and now their house smells of urine and stool. Or she was there for a week before they realized that she doesn't take a shower, that they had to like remind her to take a shower. Or, you know, dad's Parkinson's progressed. They didn't know that he was falling every day until he got up to their house up in the Midwest or up north, and he was falling every day. So it really takes adult kids, it seems to take adult kids a fair amount of disruption for them to think, oh, wait, maybe mom and dad are not doing as well as we thought. Same thing with the pandemic. You know, it woke a lot of adult families, adult kids up and said, oh my gosh, what are we going to do with mom and dad? We don't have any type of aging plan for them. And now we can't travel to go see them and make sure that they're okay. So sometimes it takes families to get pretty disrupted like that, whether it's a hurricane or a pandemic, to say, look, your parents are not doing as well as you would like to think. Falls is a huge problem at home. Nutrition, safety in general. Like, would your parents know what to do if they were robbed or if there was a house fire, you know, and your dad is in the mid stage of dementia? Would he know to get out of the house, or would he call 911? Or are they falling prey to scams? So when there's not enough supervision, whether it's through the family or through care that's being brought into the home, that's when they start to really fail, because that's when they get taken advantage of. That's when they start falling, they lose weight, and they're just not safe at home if you don't have enough supports in place or an actual aging plan. So how to age gracefully? What is an aging plan? Have to keep moving our little faces over. So why an aging plan matters. So Genworth Beyond the Dollars 2018 study found this to be true. I'm not going to go over all of these statistics, but it's enough for you to realize, oh my goodness, this could be me. I might fall into this category. So with family caregivers, 46% of family caregivers had to work fewer hours. 30% missed career opportunities. 63% are paying for their loved one's care out of their own funds. And 42% of family caregivers reduced their own contributions to their own savings and retirement account. So let's just kind of break this down a little bit. So say you're a business owner, and if you're not out with clients and you're tending to your aging parents, how are you going to maintain your business and help take care of your parents, knowing that the average caregiver spends a minimum of 22 hours per week taking care of their aging parents, whether that's going over to make sure that they have groceries in the refrigerator, doing their laundry, helping them with their showers, taking them to doctor's appointments. You know, for some people, whether it's an employee or a business owner, if they're not working, they're not making money. So for example, let's use a realtor, for example. So if your daughter's a realtor and you live in Arizona, but your daughter's a realtor in North Carolina, but she has to keep flying to Arizona every time you have a medical crisis or a fall or some sort of hospitalization, she's not making money if she's not there showing houses. Right? So if you're the mom and the dad on this webinar, think about like how often are your kids coming to the rescue every time there's a health issue or a hospitalization. And this doesn't mean to not call them. This means that this underlines the importance of having an actual aging plan so that when those things happen, your kids aren't one of these statistics. 35% of people lost vacation time or sick time. Just this week, I had 4 family members that said, oh, I was supposed to go away on vacation because we haven't had a vacation for like 3 years, but mom just went into the hospital. What are we supposed to do? You know, or cancel another vacation. So 35% of people have repeated work absences. I can tell you that a lot of my sons and daughters, by the time they hear about me or decide that it's time to make a phone call and at least learn about what an aging plan is, they've already exhausted all of their FMLA. They have no vacation days left, and they've already burned through their FMLA. So these are major problems that we have. So it's really important to develop that aging plan before that crisis hits, so that when that crisis hits, you're not having to miss 3 or 4 weeks of work, or telling your husband, honey, you know, I need to get to Arizona and that flight's another $1,000, but what am I supposed to do? Because dad fell again, he's in the hospital. What are we supposed to do? So you can see how this can really spiral out of control pretty quickly. And even with caregiving, you know, it starts out small, like going to get their mail or dropping off groceries, but pretty soon it's a full-time job, whether it's managing their business affairs, they're paying their bills, having to be on the phone with their long-term care insurance, trying to get coverage for that. You know, I can tell you that a lot of families totally underestimate how much time it takes to be a caregiver, whether it's handling their finances as a financial power of attorney or their healthcare decisions, shopping. It all snowballs very quickly. And then that's when you start getting a lot of family resentment and family angst. So why is an aging plan important? One of the value propositions is that it's a neutral third-party person to facilitate the family meeting. So like when I facilitate the family meetings, we talk about, you know, things that families don't want to communicate. They don't want to talk about aging and dementia and confusion and mom's incontinence, or dad keeps missing his doctor's appointments, or mom's still driving and she shouldn't. How are we supposed to handle that? So that's why families call us to help with all of these types of difficult conversations that they don't feel comfortable having for themselves, but also, in all fairness, How would you know how to facilitate your own family meeting when you're in uncharted territory and you don't know the healthcare ins and outs, and you don't know about insurance coverage and all those kind of things? So that's why an aging plan and having a family meeting facilitated by that neutral third party is really effective. I can share with you that when a lot of families try to have these family meetings on their own, it goes south really quickly because of family dynamics, or there's a lot of family denial, or people don't understand that dad has progressed much more than what they realized. So there's a lot of denial. So when we do an aging plan in these family meetings, we talk about what's working well. So everybody gets an opportunity to share what's working well, what's working less well. The things that are always the same with working less well is caregiver burnout, sons and daughters missing work, taking early retirement to become caregivers, marital angst because the caregiver is missing too much family time away, disease progression, falling, weight loss. Those are all pretty standard working things that are not working well at home. Or scammed. Probably at least 8 or 10 times a month, I get frantic calls from families because they knew that things weren't going well, but now they actually can get to see their parents and they see a stack of mail and realize, oh, I guess mom and dad can't handle their finances anymore. And they see these credit cards maxed out because they got scammed, or they see bank accounts that have been depleted because they got scammed because no one was there to oversee that. And they didn't have any financial safeguards in place. So we find out during the family meeting and during the aging plan, what are your goals as you age? We already talked about, most people want to age in place at home, but can they afford that? Is it feasible? Is it realistic? If they want to age in place at home and they have $6 million, then that's much more feasible than someone who has $150,000 and they're 72 years old, right? Because I have clients that are paying $8,000 and $10,000 a month to be able to stay at home with 24/7 caregivers. So if you've got the budget for that, that's great. But if you don't, then we need to think about, well, what does that look like? What other solutions are there? So what supports are needed right now to make life better for all? Again, 92% of my clients come to me in crisis mode, where there's been a fall, a stroke, the death of a caregiver, dementia progression. There's been something that has triggered a crisis. So we have to take care of the crisis situation first. And then what care options do you qualify for? One thing that a lot of families don't realize is they'll be like, oh, we'll just get home care in. But again, like I said earlier, they think Medicare is going to pay for all of this, and it just does not. So unless there's some sort of financial solution in place, like long-term care insurance or aid in attendance or some sort of financial solution to offset some of that cost, aging in place at home may not be feasible for you. Like in Florida, Medicaid or Title 19, I believe, only covers 16 hours per week of home care. Well, there's a lot of leftover hours in a week other than those 16, right? So who's gonna fill the rest of that shift, and who's gonna pay for that? So what are the financial and insurance resources that we have to work with? I pull in the financial planner if they're willing to use a collaborative approach. So that can be the trick. Because a lot of times adult kids don't know what their parents have in place. They don't even know who the financial advisor is. They don't know who the attorney is, the CPA. So with the aging plan, we talk about who are all of the professionals that you work with so that your kids can be aware in the event that they would ever need to reach out to any of these professionals. What internal resources can we leverage? Does the family want to take lead on certain things? Does the daughter who just retired, does she really want to be the full-time caregiver? Or did she retire so that she could travel and spend time with her own family? So what internal resources can we leverage? And what do we need to outsource? So if the family doesn't want to do it or they can't, it's not feasible because they can't just quit their jobs, or maybe the family relationships are so deteriorated that they really can't be caregivers for each other. We need to outsource that level of care then. Vacation, visitation, respite schedule to relieve the primary caregiver. So if you decide that, yep, I'm going to take care of mom, and you're the daughter, We need to be having a solution in place so that you don't feel overburdened, and the family needs to, either step in and help with making sure you can take some time off, or we've got to have professional caregivers to provide that respite for you. How does our family communicate? Do we work as a team? So a lot of my clients, I end up doing family mediation with them as well. And a lot of that is because their parents chose to stay at home, and the kids are really bending over backwards to do everything that they can to make sure that their parents can stay at home. But it's definitely to the demise of the family relationships and certainly the finances of these adult kids. What family communication system do we need to employ? Like, how can we communicate better with each other? So these are all things that I help families with. We put solutions and systems in place so that everybody can have better outcomes. So some families will create a family Facebook page where it's just, here's what we have for mom's appointments and who can help get her there. Some people use a Dropbox account or a Google Calendar. So that way everybody can divide and conquer what tasks need to be done. So it's not all on the shoulders of one person. So sometimes after I say this, people will say in the chat box, yeah, but Sally lives next door to mom and the rest of us live out of state. How are we supposed to help? That's a great question. So how you can help is you can still offer support. You can still say, you know what, I'm going to be coming down, coming to see you every couple of months so that the caregiver can get away. Maybe you can handle the bills or the finances. There's a lot of things that you can do remotely. If you need to do the online shopping so that your sister caregiver doesn't have to go to the store all the time, and you can have things shipped to your parents' house, for example. So there's a lot of things that you can do even if you are out of state or out of town. Help families understand their care options if they are not aging in place, if they're not aging in place at home. So we've got adult daycare programs that could be a really good solution depending on what your situation is. We've obviously got home care, which is a fantastic solution if you can afford it and it makes sense. That the companions can really add so much quality of life to your loved one and give them so much joy when it's the right companion. So we also look at, that's great that you might want to age in place at home, and we can help you do that as long as you've got the finances to pay for what care you need to have brought into the home. But what's the plan if aging in place at home is no longer feasible or safe, or you're too isolated, or you can't get to your appointments, or you keep missing your medications and you keep firing the home care worker? So what are some other options? And that would be living in a care community of some sort, whether it's independent living, assisted living, memory care, or skilled nursing. There's value in moving into these types of care communities sooner rather than later. Number one, you have to financially qualify to get into many of these types of care communities. You have to physically qualify to get into these care communities, and you have to cognitively qualify. So what happens a lot of times is Ethel and Marvin decided to stay at home so long that now they either don't have money because they burned through all of their assets paying for home care, and now they only qualify for Medicaid, which means nursing home level of care, unless they live in an area where in assisted living, there's a few assisted living facilities that do contract with Medicaid, but those can be few and far between. So we have to look at, with that aging plan, what is the plan if mom and dad are not successful at home? Where do they qualify to live? Where does it make sense for them to live? If they live in Tucson, Arizona, but all of you kids live in Minneapolis, how feasible is it that you're going to be able to properly advocate for them when they need advocating the most? And that's as they get older. The other thing people don't think about is that, you have to physically qualify to get into these care communities as well. And they may very well have bypassed that whole assisted living level of care because they chose to stay at home, and now they only qualify for nursing home care because now they're falling, or they're medically unstable, or they're not safe behind closed doors, and now they don't qualify for assisted living level of care. So an aging plan continued. we help families with the market research. So we do the market research on these facilities so that which facilities your parents qualify for, what their amenities are, their floor plans. We review the state survey findings. We get their COVID protocol. Now, granted, that can change literally by the day. A lot of out-of-state facilities, or a lot of facilities, are not admitting out-of-state residents. So if you're in Minnesota and your parents live in Tucson, as an example, and your parents need some sort of facility placement, that's why we help with this whole process, because it's confusing and it's complicated. So not all facilities are taking new admissions at this point, especially if they're out of state. We also get the camera policy, because we encourage that if your loved one is in a private room in a facility, or if they're at home with home care, you really need to consider getting a camera put in. And yes, you have to notify the facility, you have to get authorization, and yes, you have to notify the home care company. But I'm here to tell you, as a daughter who had a loved one in a memory care unit, once I was able to get that camera put in, the reason my mom was falling every 2 weeks was because on the camera, we noticed that the second shift caregivers kept taking her walker away from her and putting it in the bathroom, totally out of reach. So of course, with dementia, she's going to get up and start walking. And of course, she was falling every 2 weeks and landing in the ER, because we didn't know that they were taking her walker away until we put that camera in there. So again, the more that you can advocate for your loved one, the better. We also get the room size, what are the level of care rates, and are they able to age in place in these particular care communities? The reason that you want to have this all buttoned up is because conditions can change quickly with your parents. One fall can change the trajectory of if they can age in place at home. One stroke can change that trajectory as well. But you also have to think about waiting lists. Some of these care communities might have a 6-month waiting list or a year waiting list. Before the pandemic, a lot of the good facilities had a 2 to 3 to 4 or 5 year waiting list. So every day that you don't have a plan in place for the what ifs of aging, for the what ifs of aging in place at home, if that doesn't work out, you've got to have your loved one on a waiting list of 3 or 4 different facilities just in case. Otherwise, I promise you, they will end up in whatever facility has an open bed, and that may or may not be the right fit. So we help families identify the gaps in their planning with a grab and go binder. It's got 11 tabs. It's got all things that you and your family will need to know in the event of a medical crisis or a death, but all the legal documents, the insurance policies, end of life wishes and what conversations, the funeral arrangements. So all of that is in the grab and go binder, and it's a big checklist as well, so that you can make sure that you have everything in place. If any of you have ever been through a medical crisis or an unexpected death of a loved one, and then found yourself taking hours and hours and hours of time trying to figure out what they all had in place, you'll understand the value of that grab and go binder. Education, 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 so that you can make informed decisions. I can't tell you how many families I work with that they thought that they knew what they knew, only to have made terrible mistakes on behalf of their aging parents. And then they bring me in to basically undo what they thought that they knew they were doing. So it's just better to work with a professional right from the get-go and get it done right the first time. Just like you hire an attorney to put a legal plan in order, and you hire a financial planner to put a financial plan in order, that's what people do with us. They bring us in to put that aging plan together. So at the end of the aging plan, just so that in case you decide you want to try to do this on your own, I just gave you the whole outline of the aging plan and the family meeting. But you want to also break it down into like phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. Like, what's the most important thing that we're going to start with first? And that might be the estate documents, maybe making sure that mom and dad's legal affairs are in order, because dad has got dementia and he's starting to lose ground pretty quickly. Phase 1 might be, let's get home care started, because dad's losing weight. He's not taking his medications. He's not bathing himself. He's not getting to the grocery store. So, that's what we do with the aging plan is what's going to be phase 1, what's phase 2. And let's make sure that we're working as a team as much as possible as a family, because you're going to need to have to stick together through this aging process. It is bumpy, and you want to work as much as possible as a team. But we also appreciate that a lot of families might not have the relationship or communication tools internally as a family to lead their own family meeting. And that's where we can help you and add value so that you can make smart decisions on behalf of your parents. So aging in place can be a wonderful thing if you've got the finances and you can find the right care companions to help make that be successful. But we also know that people don't always thrive at home, especially as they lose capacity, especially as they lose their mobility. And they really do thrive when they get into the level of care that they actually need, which tends to be like assisted living. So any questions? I see there's some things in the chat box. Any questions?
Some people ask, could they receive a copy of the presentation?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, and we will make sure that that comes out too. You will get a replay. So look for that in your email in the next day or so.
And with your experience, can you recommend any particular type of camera or monitoring service?
Yeah, actually. So cameras, because I had obviously cameras in my mom's room in the memory care unit. And that's actually, I think at that time, what saved her life, because I knew what was happening to her, at least in her room. I didn't know what was happening to her outside of her room because I don't have a camera out there and you can't. But because of the pandemic, you definitely want to have a camera in there. So I've used Wise camera. Yep. So I see someone wrote in there. So I've got like 3 Wise cameras. And then I also have NetView, I think is what it's called. Geez, I should know because that's the one I have at my own house. But yeah, I think it's called NetView. Yeah, NetView. And so those are the 2 that I have the most experience with. And I don't have any challenges with them. They stay online. They can pan back and forth, so you can look at the whole room. And they do actually pretty well at nighttime too, so that I could see like the staff coming into her room and I could identify them so that when I had complaints, which I often did, I could say, well, it was the staff member because I could see them on the camera. Just so that you know, because this is what I found that the staff were doing in mom's memory care unit. They knew that the camera was there. They didn't like the camera being there. So they always, even though mom didn't need 2 people to go and help her get ready for bed, because she could do a lot of that on her own, but they'd have that second person coming in to basically stand in front of the camera. So that's what I mean. Your loved one is at the mercy of these people in these care facilities and at the mercy of these people that are taking care of them at home. So you have to advocate for them. And I have a whole class on that, but that's a whole different thing. But anyway, cameras are important. Yes, you live 2 hours away. You can check on her anytime. Yep, that's great. And giving your siblings access to. Waiting list, you can be on a waiting list as long as you need to be. So a lot of facilities, because I always say every day that your loved one's not on a waiting list, someone else put their loved one on a waiting list and might have taken your spot. So you can be on a waiting list as long as you need to be. So what they'll do is they'll just call you and say, okay, Katie, we have an opening. How are things going at home with your parents? And then you can say, yep, we're ready to make that move. Or if you're not quite ready or your parents aren't quite ready to make that move, then you just stay on the waiting list and they'll call you again. They'll just keep calling all of the people on the waiting list until they fill that apartment or fill that bed. But I can also tell you, because I have clients all across the country. So there's some facilities in Chicago that well, in a lot of places you have to pay to be on the waiting list. Like I had my parents on a waiting list as well for 3 different places, and you pay to put them on the waiting list. But there's some places in Chicago that we found that you only get to refuse that apartment 3 times and then they take you off the waiting list. So, but most places don't do that. But Chicago, I think, is pretty competitive. So you only get 3 refusals and then you have to start all over. Oops, where'd they go? You have
Can
2
you
cameras
review-
at your mom's. Yep, that's awesome. The more
And
cameras.
I think we have time for maybe 1 or 2 more questions. So when I know we have more than that, but you can go
Yeah.
ahead and choose what you think is the most salient.
Can you review the different levels of care
Sure.
that these facilities have?
Yeah, I don't know that we're gonna have enough time to do that whole thing, but independent level of care, independent living level of care is basically just a blank, barren apartment. You have to furnish it. There's no care that's associated with that. So if your loved one leaves their home to go into independent living, then you have to bring in home care or companion care because it's just an apartment. They may provide 1 meal a day, but it's just an apartment. Assisted living is, but independent living also has, they may or may not have activities as well. So it just depends on the state that you live in. Assisted living is definitely a social and a medical model. So they'll have call lights or call pendants. They'll have activities. They'll have outings. They provide 3 meals a day, but you also have to physically qualify to stay there. So like in Florida, if you require 2 people to transfer you out of the bed or off the toilet because you've declined so much, then you can't stay there. You have to move into a nursing home. So assisted living, you can stay. Most of them will charge like a basic room and board rate. And then however much care you need on top of that, then they have what we call levels of care rates. So it could be $2,000 to get your bath and laundry done and housekeeping and all that kind of stuff. So they have different level of care rates. So the more care you need, the more you pay. A skilled nursing center is a nursing home. So that's for folks that need 24-hour care 7 days a week by nurses and CNAs. Skilled rehab is where you go when you've had like a broken hip, for example, and you're coming from the hospital. You've had your 3 overnight stays, qualifying overnight stays in the hospital. And the doctor says, oh, you need to go to a rehab center to get stronger. That's a skilled rehab center. You're going there just for the therapy. And usually you're in and out in 2 to 4 weeks, depending on what you went in for, but usually hips are 2 to 3 weeks. And you get stronger, you meet your therapy goals, and then you go back home or you go to assisted living. Memory care is usually like assisted living level of care. That's a secured level of care. So that's a locked door because that's for people that tend to wander or might be a flight risk. Some of them have a base rate, just like a regular assisted living. It might be a $3,000 base rate, but then the more care you need or supervision, the higher the rate will be. Other memory care facilities, it's a flat fee. So it might be $7,500, no matter if you need help with all sorts of activities of daily living or none, it's just a flat fee. So memory care is you have to have a dementia or a dementing diagnosis to get in. They all require a doctor's order. So assisted living, skilled nursing, skilled rehab, and memory care require a doctor's order to be admitted, and you have to pass their assessment to get in. So the facility will have a whole process for pre-admission assessment that you have to pass. You have to have enough money to live there. You have to require a certain amount of care. You have to have certain diagnoses to be able to stay in those places. That's a down and dirty of the different levels of care.
And I'll just break in here. We're just about ready to end here, but Anna Lee has done a webinar about the different types of care communities, and that webinar is available on our website if you're interested in that. Well, I do have to end things. Annalee, we know this is an important topic. That's why we have you back again and again. We appreciate both you and for moderating, and for Annalee for coming to present again. From Advice Chaser, thank you everyone for attending. Thanks to the organizations who have made this possible. Here at Advice Chaser, we're all about helping you find a financial advisor who's a great fit for you and your life and financial questions. Our matching service is free to you, and every one of our advisor partners is committed to offer a free initial consultation to anyone we introduce them to. So you just go to advicechaser.com and click on Find an Advisor to start that process. Once again, from Advice Chaser, thank you so much for attending, And we will see you at another webinar too. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
I guess
Thanks, Tran. It was nice to meet you.